When I was 10 in Trinidad and Tobago, in a primary school, on a playground, 4 words gripped my heart and set me on a course to look for social justice. And those 4 words came to me because among 200 to 300 children every day was one individual whose hair was never combed, whose shirt was never as white and as crisp as mine, whose skirt was never as pressed and as pleated as mine, and who never wore a decent pair of shoes. And you know, we were in that playground day in and day out, and then one day, I looked at that child and I saw her. I saw her as a human being, and it touched me. And the only thing I can do is go home and say, Mommy, how is it possible? How is it possible that a child could be in a playground among all of us and no one do anything to change her circumstance? What can we do? And being the humanitarian that my mom was, she came in and she discovered what was happening. As it turned out, this young lady was actually living in an abandoned bus with her mother and siblings. And therefore, she could not show up to school as I did. Well, that question that I asked at that point in my life when I was 10 years old, what can I do? It led to this young lady having a chance, an opportunity to win. Fast forward about a decade, and now I'm about 21, in New York City. And against all odds, I am determined to earn a degree in communication arts. And thankfully enough, my parents were able to cover that cost, but they were not able to cover my living expenses, and so I needed to work. And so I head out looking for work, and of all jobs that fall into my lap, it's a teaching gig. And now, if you had asked me if I was going to be a teacher, I would have said no. I was the worst student that existed. I gave the teachers the most trouble in my school. And therefore, I was never going to be a teacher because I know God was wide awake, yeah? So, nevertheless, I needed to work, and this is what came. And that became my passion. Well, in my early days of teaching, I was running a video production class, doing some video work with some young children, about 20 of them. And a little one comes into my room. And she's sprightly, she's colorful, she has 2 different color socks, things in her hair. She's very busy, but very, very, very friendly. And she comes into my space and she's looking at me. And I said, yes, can I help you? And she says, I want to be here. I said, but you don't have this class on your schedule. So she says, yes, but I want to be here. I said, you don't belong here. She says, Miss Thompson, you are wrong. I belong here. I said, well, why don't you go to the office, get it changed, and come back, and I will bring you in. So she goes to the office, gets it changed, and she comes back. And she comes back with such a passion to be the best performer that she can be, that I hooked into that spirit. And I used it as inspiration to be the best teacher that I could be. And then something happened. A 14-year-old boy was shot dead on Madison Avenue. And that question came back into my heart. What can I do? Was I doing enough? The answer to that question brought life to Necessary Arts. And we ran programs in drama and dance to any child who would come off the street from 6 to 8 in the evening. And then life happened and I had to return to Trinidad and Tobago. And when I got to Trinidad and Tobago, I questioned again. What can I do? What are the children of my country gaining through the arts? And I decided to register Necessary Arts as an NGO in Trinidad and Tobago while working a full-time job and using my salary to subsidize the cost of the program because I had to do something. And there was a mandate that I set that Necessary Arts will bring in 10% of its participants as at-risk children. Any at-risk child who wanted to come into our program, Necessary Arts found a way for them to be there. And they were to make up 10% of our population, and we were able to do that for a good 7 years. 4 years into that, something happened. My mom was diagnosed with cancer. And 3 years later, she passed. And when she passed, I made a life decision. And the question came up again. Am I doing enough? What can I do? Well, then I decided to travel halfway across the world, and I ended up in the Middle East, I ended up in Far East Asia, Southeast Asia, and now I'm back in the Middle East, Dubai. And I have a fabulous job in Dubai, and I am teaching, and I clock out at 3:30, and I go home. And then the question starts to come back up. Naima, what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? Well, while I am in this region, it makes complete sense to me to get to the communities within this region with Necessary Arts. And so I register Necessary Arts as a branch here in Dubai. And I get on a plane and I travel to Kenya. Now, I don't know anybody in Kenya, but I want to do something. I want to feel as if my existence and my talent and my gifts are specifically to change people's lives. And so I get on that plane and I get to Kenya and I tell the travel agent, listen, I don't want a safari. I don't want to go jumping up and down with the Maasai. I want children. Take me to children. And we formed the program called Reach the Unreachable. And we covered 5 areas across Kenya, reaching up to 100 children per location. And throughout that year and a half of taking Reach the Unreachable to Kenya, something happened. I was diagnosed with cancer. And I thought, well, what kind of God is this that is going to look at his daughter and inflict her with this disease? And of course, my mom had passed, and so the panic in my heart that I will not be able to fulfill what I knew my purpose would be. And I laid many nights in so much pain, deep in my bones, so much pain from that chemotherapy. And I had to ask, Naima, are you going to let this cancer suck the power out of you and take the opportunities that you have given to these children in Kenya away? What can I do, I asked myself, in that pain? And the answer that came was inspire other teachers to go to Kenya. And so I inspired like-minded educators to go to Kenya and take Reach the Unreachable to the children, and they did. Well, I survived cancer, and I am completely cancer-free. Thank you. So the question comes up again in my life, well, now that you're cancer-free, what are you going to do? I find myself in a country in the Middle East, standing among almost 40 children who have survived crisis and conflict and some of the worst atrocities. And I am standing amidst these children, and I realize I am so inadequate. I am inadequate. There is no way I can help these kids. With everything that I have, all the talent that I have, I cannot help them. And so the question comes up again, what can I do? And so I go and I have a meeting with some psychologists who share with me that they too were feeling inadequate and that conventional psychiatric methods were no longer enough to work with traumatized children. And that they indeed had to become creative and innovative and risk takers. And that it would be a good idea to collaborate with artists to try to find a middle ground where we can reach these children. And in that process, it occurred to me that I could pursue drama therapy. And so the answer to my question, what can I do, was do some research, find out more about drama therapy, and pursue it. And so I did. And so now I am an intern drama therapist, registered with the North American Drama Therapy Association in San Francisco. And I am in the middle of studies to earn that certification. Well, in my quest to understand drama therapy, I wanted to try it out with a very specific program. So I took myself to Tobago and with a team of us, and we went to work with about 20 young people. And it was there that I met a young man named Diamond. We set out to tell their stories. We set out to have them be the protagonists in their own stories as we role-played their real-life stories. And Diamond's story had to do with being an athlete. Diamond was representing Trinidad and Tobago as a track star. And he took the block, and before the gun could go off, he went off, and he held that failure, that false start, and it broke him. And when he looked to his community for support, they crushed him. In the role play, we rewind the story. He takes the block again, and before he can go off, before the gun could go off, he goes off. And again, he feels that failure. But this time in the role play, his community lifts him up. And in that moment, Diamond experiences what we call catharsis. Such a significant change in emotion that brought him to tears and to the realization that he can succeed. And in that moment, I realized that I had made the right choice and that pursuing drama therapy was absolutely the way to go. The question, what can I do, when I was 10 years old in a playground, has stayed with me my entire life, and it drives me and guides me to do the best that I can do for humanity. And so the question is, what can you do? Can I urge you to dig deep for the power of you to ask the question, what can I do? Might I make a suggestion that perhaps the next time you take a walk in the mall, that you look for the hired help who is walking behind the privileged, and let your eyes meet theirs. Look above their foreheads and see the words, I have value, and offer up a smile to that person. Or might I ask you, on your next vacation, if you are traveling for about 10 days, to take 2 of those days and go to a remote village. in a developing nation and sit with a child with a book and read and see the images and the words come off of that page through your voice and touch a child. That's what I could suggest. I don't know what you would do, but might I please urge you to dig deep and recognize the power of you and act upon it by asking, what can I do? Thank you.